Okay folks, in this video we're going to have a look at solving some equations, and they could start from the very easy, where we can probably just do this in our head. So 3 multiplied by what gives us 12. Now what I want you to do, what I want you to think about is, in solving this equation, what we're actually going to do, we're not moving anything. You can see on this side it involves a multiplication by 3. So what I'm going to do to both sides is I'm going to do the inverse of that operation. I'm going to divide both sides at 3. Now some people call this scaffolding because they like to put scaffolding up like that. And if we divide both sides by 3, what we're left with is just an x and 4, and we have our answer. And this is quite nice. What you need to remember is that what you do to one side, you need to do to the other to keep our equation balanced. So let's go a little bit harder, and we might have something like 2x plus 1 equals, I don't know, 9, for argument's sake. And again, you might be able to work this out in your head, but when we get on to more complicated equations, you won't be able to work it out in your head, and you need to be able to show what you're doing on paper. Now, the question I want to ask you is, do we divide both sides by 2 first, because that's the inverse of multiply by 2, or do we take 1 from both sides? And what I want you to do is I want you to think about, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have a look at how this equation actually works. How do I actually get to 9? Well, what I do is I start with my x value, okay? And then, because if you remember BODMAS, okay, we do multiplication before we do addition. So the next thing that I would do would be to multiply by 2. I then add on 1 and I get to my answer, which is 9. Now in solving this, all I'm asking you to do is to do the opposite. So we're going to start with 9, okay, and then what are we going to do? Well, the first thing, the opposite, the inverse of -1, the inverse of +1 is to take away 1. So let's write that down. Let's have a look at what we would do. So 2x plus 1 equals 9. So I'll put my scaffolding up. I'm going to take 1 from both sides, and I'm going to end up with 2x equals 8. Now what's the next thing over here? It was times by 2, so the inverse of that is divide by 2, okay? And we should get back to x by doing that. So let's divide both sides by 2, and we get x equals 4. So in solving equations, what I want you to do is I want you to focus on how the equation actually works, because then, and only then, can you start to do the opposite. So it's very important that we know how this equation works. It's important that we know that we do the multiplication by 2 first, and then the add on 1 to get to our 9. Because if we know this order, then we can do the inverse in the correct order. And it does matter. It matters because if I'd have done divide by 2 first and then take off 1, I wouldn't have got the right answer. So let's go a little bit more complicated. Let's try, I don't know, x plus 2 divided by 3 equals, I don't know, 3. Okay? So let's see how this equation works, and we can work out what order to do things in. So, let's have a look. So we start with x. This is how the equation works. You will then add on 2. You will then divide by 3 on the bottom, this one. And you get to the answer, which is 3. So let's have a look at how we unpick that. We've got x plus 2 over 3 equals 3. So if you look here, The last thing that we did was divide by 3. So the first thing we're going to do to both sides here is the opposite of that. So that we're going to multiply both sides by 3, and we get x plus 2 equals 9. Now, what we did over here is the first thing that we did was add 2 to both sides. So we need to do the inverse of that. So we're going to take 2 from both sides, and we get our answer, which is x equals 7. So again, what I need you to do is I need you to think about how this equation actually works. How do you actually get to 3? We need to add on the 2, then divide by 3, and that gives us the 3. So because the last thing we did over here, look at the order I do things in, x plus 2 divided by 3, that's the order that we're going to do in reverse. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with this question here that I want you to try yourself. And I want you to try and solve it and work out what x is. And what I'm going to tell you is, I'm going to tell you the order in which this equation works to help. You start with x, you multiply by 2, you then add on 4, you then divide that by 2, you then add on 13, and you get 19. So what I want you to do is I want you to do those inverse operations in that order. Okay, so this is how it works. X times 2 plus 4 divide 2 plus 13. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to try this, scrap a bit of paper or something somewhere, and can you solve that? Can you determine what x is? And if you can, I'd really be quite happy.